Hello, my name is Bill Gaylor. I'm president of the Lynbrook Chamber of Commerce and I'm the owner of the Lynn Gift Shop on Atlantic Avenue. I'm here to try to explain to the residents how important shopping in the local community is. Did you know that for every $100 spent in a local store, $68 goes back into the community in the form of taxes, payroll, contributions, and this is something that you will not find when you shop in a local big box store. In that case, only about $44 comes back into the local community. And if you shop online, nothing goes back to the local communities. I don't think people appreciate the fact that the local economy is very, very important to Lynbrook's well-being. All of the local organizations come into our stores asking for contributions, which we gladly give. Churches, temples, Little League, all the youth groups. It's very, very important that you understand and that you support the local economy.
I'm Jeff Greenfield, the Executive Vice President of the Lynbrook Chamber of Commerce and the owner of NGL Insurance Group. And I want to thank you for calling to the attention of the community that they should shop locally and support the local merchants, because it's those local merchants and the professionals in the community that support the community activities in the community. The schools, the PTAs, and all the service clubs, and of course the fire department. And through that support and our fundraising efforts of the Chamber, everything is donated back to the communities in support of these activities, the houses of worship, and the Chamber takes great pride in partnering with the village, and we thank the mayor for the opportunity to partner with the village, whether it's the banners on Sunrise Highway or any other activity that we engage in with the village, like the winter celebration and Patriots Day last year. And when you shop locally, you'll get the knowledge and satisfaction that these merchants are supporting the community, and that's important. And when we shop locally, we also know that the businesses are able to support and sustain the community.
So please visit our website, lynbrookusa.com, and you will get a complete listing of all those businesses that belong to the Chamber of Commerce. Support those businesses. You have to realize that with these people, you are their friends, you are their customers. When you shop in the malls, you are nothing but another sale. So please support your chamber, please support the local businesses, and we promise you we will do all we can to help you.
Hello, I'm Brian Curran, Mayor of the Village of Lynbrook. I'm here with Chamber of Commerce President Bill Gaylor and Vice President Jeff Greenfield. We wanted to take this opportunity to wish all the Lynbrook residents a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, and a Happy New Year. We also wanted to take this opportunity to encourage all the Lynbrook residents to shop locally this holiday season.
Happy holidays.
Bob Simpson, and for today I'm Mr. Simpson the Miller at the Haviland Davison Grist Mill. And what I was showing here is the to scale water wheel, and of course this whole model is a 1-inch scale, so we wanted to have a proper size water wheel, except I'm having a little difficulty with the turning. So I sometimes just take it off and let it sit while the rest of the gears and cogs are working. I don't know whether you can see that or not, but this has 2 sets of millstone. One set is turning now about 100 times a minute, and that's where the grain would have been ground. And this other set is stationary, is not usable, and it has a crane above it that they use to actually lift the millstone up and turn it over and dress it, sharpen it up a little bit.
This is the quern, and this is where you grind the wheat, which they have the children place in the center here, and then the kids come and they grind it. It's gives them an idea of how grain is made and flour.
going to take about 20 of you and send you back with Miller Bob over here. And so let's take the last 4 in that row, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16.
Now remember, this is can be a small farm or a big farm. After he cuts the wheat, he's got to bring it to the barn. Now he's got his wagon, he puts everything in, he brings it to the barn, and on really crummy weather days, they go into the barn, and that would be the whole family who does that, most likely, or his helpers. And they use a club to bang up the heads of the wheat so that they can get the seeds out. And that's called threshing. Threshing. Does anybody have a card that might say that? So we have threshing wheat. That would be next. Okay. Now he's got this whole pile in the middle of his barn, and he's got all the little pieces of the wheat. He's got the seeds. He's got little things that look like maybe pieces of cut grass.
Okay, good. Did you see where all the flour was coming around you? So you're crushing it down, making flour, and that's when you make bread. Flour on the bread. Okay, did you get the papers too?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Art Mattson, Limerick Village historian. I hope you'll join me for a few minutes of Limerick history. Today's edition is being presented here at the Limerick Public Library, thanks to the Historical Society of East Rockaway and Limerick. This edition is about farming in Limerick and East Rockaway. 2 centuries and more of farming. Thank you. This evening's discussion is about farming in Limerick and East Rockaway, and I want to take you back quite a while ago. This would be about 100 years ago, and this is a postcard. You see it says, "Greetings from Lynbrook, Long Island." And that wouldn't be a surprise to someone to see that, because that's the way Lynbrook looked 100 years from now, at least a good part of it, half of it anyway. Now, we've, of course, by now, the closest we come to farming would be like my backyard. I have a 10 by 20 foot plot in the backyard. I know a little bit about rotating my crops and how to plant the seeds and water, etc. But we could no easier step into this farmer's shoes and do what he was capable of doing than he would be able to operate this PowerPoint computer that I have here in this program. They're worlds apart, what we know now and what they did then. I just wonder how many of you know even what this farmer's doing in this picture? Yeah.
Driving the ground.
He's tilling? Tilling. Yeah, most would say plowing, which would be wrong, but Bob kind of has it right. And you're right too, it's tilling. He's actually harrowing. He's already plowed the ground, and those huge lumps of earth would be dug up by the plow. And now he's leveling things out so that he can put the seeds down, and so they won't fall down into the cracks. He wants his seed at a given level. Could very well be wheat that he's going to be putting in here. So that just gives you an idea how different things are from then to today. It's hard to even understand the basic tools that they had. But let's go back way before this, to the time when the first residents of this area were here, and they were Lenape Indians, specifically a group called the Rockaway Indians, part of the Algonquin overall group of Indians. A peaceful, I was going to say tribe, but they really weren't a tribe. A family group was here. And they did things such as you see here, gathering nuts and berries, hunting. And then I have a picture of a stone tool that was found in Limerick. It actually was a clam knife. And so those 3 things, hunting, the seafood products, clams, oysters, bass, Manhattan, bunker, eels, made a very rich environment. So they didn't necessarily need farming here. And farming didn't develop very well among the Indians of Long Island, both because there was such a plentiful resource of other things to eat, but there was another reason. You know, these days, some Long Islanders think, gee, we send a lot of money up to Albany, and we don't get a lot back. In fact, some are even talking about secession of Long Island from New York State. Well, the Indians of Long Island, the Rockaway, had a similar problem, except it wasn't Governor Patterson coming down. It was the Indians, the Iroquois, the warlike tribes of northern and central New York State would come down to Long Island, and these groups were called tribute groups. Tribute meaning they had to pay taxes. Now, if you were farming and harvest time was around, that would be just when your tax collector would come down and take all your products from the field that had all the ripe corn or whatever. So that was a reason why they didn't do that. Actually, the tribute that they paid was wampum. And so this area, like many others, would do a lot of carving of shells and pay that way. And so they had some squash and some beans and would fertilize with some fish, but it was minimal in this area. Most of what was gotten was off the land, so not really farming. When the Europeans came, and this shows a Dutch trader approaching an Indian, and then we also have another, one is holding a skin, could be a beaver skin, something like that. Their interest was in trading with the Native Americans that were here. But the English had a very different idea. They wanted the land. They could see that the Indians weren't using the land in such a profitable way as they could, both for grazing animals and for raising crops. And so they made a beautiful exchange with the Native Americans. They said, we'll protect you from those warlike tribes up in the north they would come from Connecticut and from upper New York. We'll protect you from them. You sign in this dotted line. And by the way, we'll give you $100 worth of axes and beads and mirrors. And for that, you will deed over to us forever, to all of our heirs forever, all the land of Nassau County. It wasn't called Nassau County, but from the Hempstead Plains south to the sea. And so the Indians were pushed down then away from this area to the bay, where the problems of disease, lack of food down there. There was seafood, but they couldn't harvest as they could here. And then the European diseases. And so finally, it only took until, this monument is in Hewlett, and it's the monument to the last of the Rockaway Indians. It still stands there in Hewlett. The last of the Iroquois Indians, who was personally known to me in my boyhood. I, owning the land, have erected this monument to him and his tribe, Abraham Hewlett, and the Indian's name was Kululu. So he was the last of them. Of course, things began to change very quickly when the Indians were removed from here. And this gives you an idea indirectly that farms were what happened. Because if you note here, I think I have a pointer that I could use. These little marks, these little squares that are here, they're symbols on this map from the key that says that they're mills. There were 7 mills along the Mill River that runs on the border of Rockville Center and Limbrook, and on Pine Brook that runs up into Malvern and Lakeview. The one down here would be the East Rockaway grist mill. Now, to have 7 mills, you've got to have an awful lot to mill. I mean, let's face it. That's very clear evidence that there was a lot of grain production here, for example, and they must have been sawing to build barns and houses. So that's a very good indirect evidence that there was a lot of farming here. But there weren't actually a lot of farms because the Europeans owned so much land. They were huge farms. And so I have this that I got from a newspaper in, I think it was 1830. Yeah, a sheriff's sale. If you look at the details of the land that's described, it's about 1/10 of all of Limbrook was being sold. And so whether it was someone died and the heirs couldn't decide what to do and the sheriff had to sell it, whatever, this was one family, in effect, giving up 1/10 of Limbrook. So the plots were very large. Now, another document, which comes from a church of the time, says that there were 40 farms in this area, meaning near Rockaway, it was called, which is East Rockaway, Lynbrook, Rockville Center, perhaps Malvern might be included. 40 farms. Now, we may fairly judge that 10 of those might have been in, let's say, take Lynbrook. Now, Lynbrook has 1,290 acres. That's the acreage of all of Lynbrook. If you divide that by 10, that's 100. So the farms in this area back in the 1830s or so were probably about 100-acre farms, quite large. Now those farmers were mostly gentleman farmers. They didn't, the earliest ones, they preferred to have, in the first days, the Indians, before they killed them off, would do the work, and then slaves. And it's not commonly known that slavery was so important on Long Island in farming. I have some statistics that are really shocking. In fact, in 1732, this goes back even earlier, there were 40,000 people on Long Island, of which 7,200 were slaves. 18%, a higher percentage than was in Virginia. So we think of the South as being a place with slavery. But these guys didn't want to do the dirty work, so they had slaves do it. So generations passed, and the farms were broken up as through inheritance. This is one farmhouse that we can no longer see. Sorry, I went the wrong way. The Squire Pearsall farmhouse from 1827. This was torn down about 60 years ago. It was on Merrick Avenue. And of course, we know the Pearsalls began to dominate this area. They began moving in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. Now, one of the things that kept business going, I'd mentioned mills. Oh, and I see that I don't have my mill picture. Yeah, the old grist mill. This was terribly important for the farmers of this area because not only could they grind their grain here and get lumber, but also it was very close to the port of East Rockaway. So they could ship their goods to New York City, to Philadelphia, to Boston, and in some few cases, as far as Europe. There were actually some sailing sloops that made it all the way to Europe with grain that was grown right from around here. But I want to go back to that map that I had up just a moment ago. This map really, I wish you could see it. I should have done a detail maybe on it. But there are areas here where we have the name Abrams. You see all the names of the Charles and F. Abrams, E. Abrams, all around this area. Well, it strongly suggests that the Abrams actually, and Abrams, owned all of that area. And then it was divided up among his heirs. Then up in this area up in here, we have the Browers. Again, they had a huge area. And up in there, the Pearsalls. Henry Pearsall owned all of this land. So ultimately, all of it got chopped up. Now, things really began to change quite a bit with the railroad, because when the railroad came, it became much more popular for people to move here, not for the reason of farming, but because it was a place you could actually commute to the city, and business began to spring up. Businesses that didn't have much to do with farming or indirectly with farming. And now you see that some of the areas in the center of the town of Pearsall, as it was called then, it's Limbrook today, all of these subdivisions are taking place. But even so, with all those subdivisions right around the heart of town, you can still see tremendous plots of land are still around. And typically it would be a farmer who may also be a blacksmith. He may also be a fisherman. Yet he would have a barn in the back and several horses and cows and a cornfield, etc. That would be typically the way these smaller farms now would be operated. These are the businesses in Pearsall's in 1876. And many of them have nothing to do with farming directly. They are fancy goods stores. I see 3 of them. The third item down may be hard to see. Oyster, confectionery, and billiard saloon. So, you know, some interesting things. There's a florist actually is in there, a barber shop. So things are changing. In the very early days, there just would have been a country store, would have been all that's there. But there are some things on this list. Again, I apologize, it's kind of small for you to see. But there are 3 blacksmith shops, a wheelwright shop, 2 of them, coal, wood, and feed depot, and another feed store. And those, of course, would have to do with farming. And this is the general country store at the 5 corners of Pearsall's, owned by J.S. Simonson. And looking at some of the products, fertilizers in the market, pure Peruvian guano. Well, that certainly was for the farmers of the area. And looking down a little further, the third item from the bottom, plows, castings, shovels. But then all manner of other things, teas, coffees, groceries, paints, and so on. I mentioned that oyster saloon. Lynbrook and East Rockaway were huge oyster centers. In fact, the oysters that were grown around here, and indirectly that's part of farming, because the oysters, actually they got seed oysters from Connecticut and would plant them, you know, as you would plant. So you hear the farming analog here. You're planting the seed oysters. And so many were being grown here that in the month of February 1882, 356,350 pounds of oysters were shipped through the Pearsall's railroad station. So you can see farming in a sense of planned layout, and each person, you'd have a lottery to get the land that you'd actually pay the town to kind of farm the oyster beds. Now this is another Lynbrook postcard. Again, it's from about 1910 or 1915. And I want to read to you a description that was done. This was written about Lynbrook at about this time, 1910. Lynbrook was then a village of chiefly working men, shopkeepers, farmers, and baymen, men who owned or worked oyster beds in the tidal creeks and salt marshes. The South Shore of Long Island was a landscape of unself-conscious beauty. Everything was small, little farms, little orchards, little white houses, master-built in exquisite functional proportions. Birch and swamp maple woods followed the course of little streams that slid silently over glinting sand. That, by the way, was written by Whittaker Chambers in his book, Witness. He was a resident of Lynbrook for most of his life. But the farmers of Lynbrook, those small farms, they found that they could no longer compete with the farms that were out west, that were growing and producing crops at a much cheaper rate than they could here on these small farms. And with transportation, railroads bringing in goods from the Midwest, they could no longer compete. And so if you look closely at this particular picture, you'll see that it's not really a farm. It's abandoned as a farm. It's gone fallow. These are weeds here. And so that's what happened. The farmers found that they could make a bigger profit by simply selling off the land for home builders. And by the 1920s, that became fierce in Lynbrook. In the year 1925, Lynbrook, and probably East Rockaway too, were the fastest growing communities on Long Island of any other community. And as they did, you can see now the lattice work of the streets is beginning to spread out. Just a couple of interesting things on this map. You can see the racetrack here, Lynbrook's racetrack. Can you see that pointer? It's kind of fine. This is the racetrack, right above Peninsula Boulevard, over by Oak Street. Oh. And then we have the trolley line that ran right through Lynbrook. So it's an interesting map. And an aqueduct that now today is Peninsula Boulevard. But it brought water to Queens from Hempstead Lake Park, Queens and Brooklyn. So you see things are beginning to change. There still undoubtedly are some small farms here. Dr. White, I know, had a farm. You see him just above the racetrack. And in fact, we know the farmhouse that was on that farm because it stands today. And it's this beautiful house, the Grove Street farmhouse, that just this year, the Lynbrook, East Rockaway and Lynbrook Historical Society arranged to get this recognized by New York State and the United States as historic places. There were three, this farmhouse and two other houses. I'm not sure. Bob, would you call them farmhouses, the other two?
Well, they really were. The Brower, especially the Brower.
The Brower one had a farm?
On Rockland, yes, it was a very large property.
Okay.
I don't know about the other one, Farmer's House.
A small. Oh, that's pretty good. 15 acres is pretty good size. So, okay. So I could have shown some of the others, but this one I know specifically when it was a farm and that a Mrs. Fensky owned it. In fact, I have a little shot of a map that shows just where she had it. This would be, we see between Oak Street and Grove Street. So that's the Fensky farm in 1906. She raised, I guess you call it truck farming, tomatoes, vegetables that she would sell locally right at the farm. But when she sold the farm, it was moved to a corner of that property so that they could lay out the streets, and the farmhouse became a residential, part of a residential development. And we're so lucky that this beautiful house has been kept in such fantastic shape, and you can see it. It's just absolutely lovely. So we have seen what one of the farmhouses looked like from the turn of the last century. What did the farmers look like? This is David and Phoebe Watts. They had a farm. I'm not sure. I have maps that show the Watts family earlier and later, I think, than this, because it doesn't say D. Watts, so I don't know that it's David Watts's, but there was a Watts up on Hendrickson Avenue and another one along Union. It's a little puzzling as to what exactly is going on here. It seems like there are baskets in that wagon, and there could be farm produce there, but they're dressed too nicely, I think, to be taking them into town to sell. So it's a little confusing, but you still get an idea of how a country farmer would look when he's dressing up. Just a little strange that they would drive to church, let's say, in a farm. What, you think it's Sunday? You would think. But they are definitely Limbrick people, because that came from a Limbrick collection. This was an interesting little article in the Brooklyn Eagle of July 30th, 1895. A large number of the residents in Limbrick raised poultry, either for supplying local boarding houses or for private use. Lately, dogs on the prowl have killed a great number of chickens, usually in the early morning. The chicken owners have been up at daylight watching their coops with a loaded shotgun. So there you get the idea. These small farmers would be growing some vegetables and also have some animals, often chickens. Here's another one that tells about poultry being very popular in this area. Limbrick again scored a sweeping victory at the Mineola Fair poultry show. William Cochran entered a string of 25 birds, of which 23 were declared winners. His champion Jersey black giant cockbird was again a winner in a strong class. Wilbur Box also assisted in placing Limbrick in the winning class with his silver-laced Wyandottes, and Henry Linder was well represented with his Anaconas. That was from the New Era, October 3rd, 1923. Wrong way. Oh, sorry. Okay. This is the lavish residence of one of Limbrick's wealthier residents, Mr. William Half. He was a wealthy coal dealer. So he's typical of the kind of small farmer in Limbrick who had another business going, but also had the farming going. The farming could never have kept him really going in a style that he wanted. Impossible. So really the farm was probably subsidized by his business. But listen to this. This is one of the most hilarious things I've ever read about farming in Limbrick. Mr. Half, this is from 1911, by the way, from the South Side Observer. Mr. Half returned home late Sunday night and heard a rustling sound in his nearby cornfield. He went in the house and secured his shotgun and his revolver. He returned to his yard and he shouted, "Come out of that corn! I've got you covered!" Receiving no reply, he waited a few minutes and again shouted, "I am not going to tell you again. If you do not come out, I will shoot." No response. More rustling. "I am going to count to 3, then I will shoot." Hearing no answer, Half counted slowly to 3 and fired his shotgun. The sound increased, more rustling. Putting down his shotgun, he pulled out his revolver. He pointed in the direction of the cornfield and the direction that this smaller noise now was coming from, the cornfield. And he walked in quest of the criminal that he had wounded. Suddenly, he was struck in the side with such force that he was thrown quite a distance. As he recovered his senses, he saw his favorite cow exit the cornfield and gallop in the direction of East Rockaway. So there's a lovely little vignette about Limbrook farming in 1911. And there were many gentlemen farmers like Mr. Half who had had more money than the farming would ever supply. The Rockaway Hunt Club, this is 1894 in the Brooklyn Eagle. The Rockaway Hunt Club had a cross-country run yesterday afternoon. The hounds were in the charge of Rene Lamontagne. Starting in Valley Stream, the huntsmen went a lively clip over fields and fences as far as Wood's Farm in Norwood. That's Malvern, by the way. From there, they circled around by Rockville Center and finally finished at Seeley's Greenhouse at Lynbrook. Seeley's Greenhouse was at Peninsula Boulevard and Hempstead Avenue, by the way. That's where that was. The distance covered was about 5 miles. Can you imagine a fox hunt running around through Lynbrook, Rockville Center, and Malvern, and Valley Stream? So they had some money if they were able to have the kinds of horses that could do that kind of maneuvering. Now, of course, there were gentlemen farmers, and then there were also a few farmers towards the end that kept the business going without a side business. They stuck to farming. There were some holdouts. There were 4 or 5 still left, even in the 20s. And this is one of them. This is the Darmstadt farm. And as was mentioned before, we're lucky to have several of the Darmstadt relatives here today. But that was the Darmstadt farm. And the farmhouse was, I've read in one source, says that it was pre-revolutionary. And so when the farmhouse was torn down in 1947, that was a tremendous loss to history. But, and so it went. So they're the family that ran this farm right up till 1947. Think of the Grossman farm, and it may be, the one up in Malvern, which itself is threatened now. And there is maybe some chance that some group will take it over, like the 4-H or Cooperative Extension, I guess they call that. I would hope they might be able to do that. But about twice the size, maybe even 3 times the size, because it was a 7-acre farm, was the Darmstadt farm. It was on the southern end of Broadway, just where Limbrook crosses over to Hewlett. It was at the intersection of Broadway and Prospect, within the village of Lynbrook, but in the Hewlett School District. And these are the farmers that started well, it was a farm before they bought it, but they bought the farm, I think it was 1888. Emil and Elizabeth Darmstadt. The picture's not good because it's a copy of a copy of a newspaper. They're shown here, by the way, in 1947. So they had been farming for, 60 years at that point. And as I said, they moved in 1888 to encounter the blizzard of 88, by the way. So they got off to a bad start, I'm told, but they apparently liked it because they stayed for a very long time. Now, last month, I had the wonderful pleasure of conducting a series of interviews over the phone with Merritt Darmstadt, who is, let me show him here. This is Merritt. I think he's probably in his 50s, would you guess? The Darmstadts, what do you think? In his 50s? I'd say. Okay, he's now 92. He's a bright and chipper and very clear-headed 92. And he was able to give me fantastic details about what it was like to live on a farm in the 20s and 30s. I have some details about the farm. I keep going the wrong way, I'm sorry. First, this wonderful picture that I just got from Sandra Messina, his daughter sent me this. That's Merritt on the right? Yes. Okay, and I'm glad, because you see what he's holding, that bucket in his hand? You'll understand later that his parents knew what his job would be in that farm when he was about 5 years old. It looks like he has a bit of almost like a lederhosen. And Darmstadt sounds like a German name. Is it, Sandra? Yes, it is. Okay, and then of course there are the Grossmans, we know that, the Rassweilers. The German farmers were able to run small farms in this area very effectively because that's the way it was done in Europe. They didn't have these massive farms such as we have out in the Midwest. They knew how to run a small farm. Seven acres divided into 3 parts. First part was truck farming, corn, tomatoes, turnips, green vegetables. The second part was a nursery, decorative hedges and shrubs, especially boxwood and barberry. There were animals, that was the third section, 300 to 400 chickens, 3 cows, 10 calves, 500 rabbits, 1,000 squabs, which are pigeons, 1,500 guinea pigs, hogs, geese, 1 plow horse, several riding horses, and a gander that was their watchdog. And Merritt says that gander was superb. Anybody ever came near that farm at night, trespassing, and by the way, he said during the Depression, yeah, people would cross over the fence and take corn and tomatoes. That gander would go squawking its head off. So that was the watchdog. Typical farm day. Up at 6 a.m., water the thousands of animals. Now this is Merritt's typical day because his job was water. Remember that bucket he was holding when he was 5 years old? That was his job from 5 years old until he left the farm at 23 and said, I'm sick and tired of farming. Okay, water the thousands of animals. There was no running water in the Darmstadt senior's house. He had water in his house, apparently, in his parents' house, but they had no running water there. So breakfast would come after watering the animals, then feed the thousands of animals. Then the big lunch, main meal of the day, prepared by Ma and Grandma, and I think I listed, I'm pretty sure I did, what it was that they had typically for lunch. They would have steak and eggs, for example, whole chickens, whole roasted chickens, lots of potatoes, vegetables, and always German-style rye bread. No white bread, no wheat bread, no fancy bread, German rye bread, every day for 3 meals. So after the big lunch, then depending on the season, you might be plowing or cultivating, harrowing, whatever, harvesting until dusk, then dinner, and then crash to bed because you were totally exhausted. And that was a typical farm day. I'll get this right eventually. Gee whiz. School. Merritt went to the Hewlett district to school. And that was his school bus. Well, not literally that one, because that's it's the near Rockaway. It might have been that. This one actually, came to the 5 Corners. And if it went down Broadway, it would have been one of these. But that's the kind of a stagecoach that ran a regular route to take commuters up to the railroad. And that's how he went to school, in the Hewlett School District. In winter, by the way, that stagecoach would put runners. They put runners on a sleigh, actually, and that's how we went to school in winter. Kind of interesting. Now, the old farmhouse was heated by a wood stove and had no running water and had outdoor toilets, as I mentioned, but his parents' house did have running water and so on. Now, what were the economics of all this? He had one really big client. It was their biggest client, Henri Charpentier, the world-famous restaurateur, the French chef extraordinaire who had presidents, people like Diamond Jim Brady and others would come to his place in East Rockaway. It says Limbrook there because he advertised it as Limbrook, but it's on Scranton Avenue, just into East Rockaway. And Henri had an order every day. It was delivered to him in a farm wagon from the Darmstadt farm, tomatoes, corn, etc., and always squabs, always at least a dozen squab pigeons that were a French delicacy, I suppose. The wagon might have looked like that, just a farm wagon. This is another old Limbrook photograph from the period. All the other customers had to stop by the farm. They did not deliver to anybody but Henri. Well, there was one other kind of odd exception. You noticed I said there were 1,500 guinea pigs, I think I had in an earlier slide. You may wonder, what did they do with 1,500 guinea pigs? Actually, there was a pregnancy test, I think, that was done with used guinea pigs, and also for scientific testing at the time. And so there was a laboratory in Queens, I believe, that they provided the guinea pigs to. So that was an unusual kind of a side business for the farm. Customers could stop by at the farm, and because they had these animals, they would slaughter turkeys or chickens on the spot and butcher them, and you get fresh meat. How good plow horses were hard to come by in those times. And so neighbors used to help each other out. So if they needed to pull something heavy, some big tree out of the ground, or even for plowing sometimes, they would share their horses with each other. And neighbors really helped each other. And he gave me an example. I got to read this to you. Yeah, about having a bull, because they had cows on the farm, and you wanted to give birth to calves for veal, and so the cows had to be impregnated, but you didn't want to have a bull because it was so dangerous. But there was a dairy farm not too far away. He couldn't remember exactly where it was. And he said that they would bring their cows over to where the bull was. As he said, we didn't want to have one on our farm, so we brought our cows over to the bull to be you-know-whatted. We paid for the service and fresh chickens. And so there was this swapping arrangement that the farmers would have. This is an example of how goods came to the farm. Now this is Joseph Simonson of Pearsall's, the old name of Limbrook, and he ran the general store in Limbrook, and he would deliver goods to various farmers and to residents of the village. In the case of the Darmstadt farm, it wasn't Mr. Simonson who came, but it was the Cookins brothers. I don't know if anybody's heard of the Cookins brothers. Anybody in the room know of them? Bingo! That's exactly right. Way to go, Pat. That was a store that was opened in 1908 by the brothers Henry, Matt, and Frank Cookins at Carmen and Atlantic Avenues. The exact site was St. Raymond's is. And so anything they needed by way of baked goods, cheese, ice, tools, pots and pans, either the Cookins brothers on their routes, they could order it from them, but others would come around. Tinsmiths would come around, and knife sharpeners, and all the things. We even remember some of those things, I think, from our youth. But it was a very organized activity. You really, rarely, he said, did he ever go into East Rockaway, or to Hewlett, or to Limbrook as a young man. Everything came to the farm. money was tight on the farm. And so workers were not hired. Grandmother Darmstadt supervised inside of the farm. Grandpa Darmstadt supervised outside. And Merritt's father and his two brothers had each of the thirds of the farm. Remember, there was the nursery, the animals, and the vegetables. So each one had a third. They were responsible for that. And Merritt's mother, his two aunts, his three sisters, four brothers, and several cousins all worked on the farm. They each had an assignment too, just as he had his watering assignment. They all had their assignments. And you can see that the Darmstadts are a productive group and having large families, and that's what you needed to make a farm like that work. Economically, you could not survive unless you had a lot of workers who were willing to do it for very little money. And thus you can see why Merritt Darmstadt said at 23, I've had enough of farming. And so he became an X-ray technician, as it happens, and joined the Navy. So the 4 or 5 farms that were in the area, even then, they even had to help each other out. So not only did you need a big family, you had to be very cooperative with the other farmers. Now, I mentioned that some of the farmers also were oystermen and clammers. Not so with the Darmstadts. They had nothing to do with that, but they did engage in one activity that had to do with the sea. This is a little bit of a fuzzy picture, but these people are salt haying. On Labor Day every year, plots were marked out in Hewlett Bay and what now is Island Park. And each family would then go out in their salt hay boats, and with their sides, they'd cut down the salt hay. And I'd known of some uses for salt hay. I'd known that it was used for insulation in the barns, that it was used to pack vegetables that you might ship into the city so the tomatoes wouldn't get crushed and so on. It was as bedding for the animals. And Merritt was aware of them, but he brought to my attention another use that I was not at all aware of. He said that they would dig holes in the ground at the end of the harvest season, about 3 feet by 6 feet and 3 or 4 feet deep, to get below the frost line. Then you'd line the bottom with salt hay, and then you put your vegetables in, typically turnips, potatoes, and others, the root vegetables. And now you cover it with more salt hay, and then some boards, and then cover that with dirt. And he said, we had fresh root vegetables all winter long, right into early spring, by digging those out. But as I said, Merritt got tired of farming at age 23. His brothers and sisters equally got tired of farming. And so this newspaper clipping eventually came out in 1947. Old Farmhouse to Go recalls life in 1700. Well, I don't know who can recall life in, I guess the existence of the farm, I guess, is a recollection of the life in it, because it was that old apparently. But the sons and daughters of the Darmstadts went off to be X-ray technicians and mechanics at Grumman and different things like that. And Emil and Elizabeth realized there was no way that the farm could ever operate, even though there might have been a few who wanted to. It could not be economical. So they sold it, and it is the residential development that is now in that area. And when they did sell it, that was the end of the road for farming in Lynbrook. That was the last of 2 centuries at least of farming, and if you count the squash and corn that some of the Indians did before that, it could be many more centuries than that. So I thank you for coming, and if there are any questions, feel free to ask. Yeah, I can turn the lights on. Yes.
In one of the maps, it said Lynbrook, Queens County.
Yes.
When did it become Nassau County?
Yeah. Nassau County and Queens County were one county, called Queens County, up until 1899. And so that's when it was voted on to separate the two. And in the year 1900, the county government was formed for Nassau County. So that's when that happened. It's very confusing. I know the first few times I saw it, I had no idea that this was Queens County, but it was. Yes, Beverly.
And when did they change the name to Lynbrook, and why?
Well, yeah, the name, Lynbrook has had many names in its past. Near Rocco was one that I mentioned. It was also called Parsons Corners and Pearsall's Corners after the Pearsalls. And then as some of that development I showed you, some of those carving up of lots started to take place once the railroad was in, real estate developers said, you know, we could attract people out to this beautiful place if we didn't have this name, Pearsall's Corners. You know, it's the name of some family that no one knows who is. Let's get I can quote what they said, we want a more euphonious cognomen. That means a sweeter sounding name. So let's take the syllables of Brooklyn and transpose them and come up with Lynbrook. And that was 1894. And the old-time residents, all the old farmers, they refused to come out for the vote. They boycotted it. They said, these upstarts can't change the name. So only the people who wanted the name to be changed came out and voted, and it was almost unanimous. And as it happens, the guy who coined the name Lynbrook, a fellow named Brennan, was the postmaster and the train master, and he put it up on the train schedules and put it up on the train tracks. So now people had to call it Lynbrook because you're not going to get here if you say, where's the train to Pearsall's? So it was kind of forced. Yeah.
In the library, they did a painting going back about 15, 20 years of the railroad, which I think, according to the information here, ran alongside the library. It wasn't up where it is right
You say there's a painting here in this library?
now. Not in the
I
library.
mean, the post office. Yeah, the post office, yeah. That was Kevin O'Malley did that painting at my request, as it happens. Yeah, the railroad actually there was running right next to Staudeman Avenue. Actually, the trolley ran down Staudeman, but then right under the first trestle is where the railroad tracks were. The tracks are pretty much where they were, but they're at ground level. That's what makes it look so different. It was in 1939 that they raised them up. Yeah.
I noticed that on the last slide when you showed the farm being sold, the byline was Grant Park.
Oh, very
This is
interesting.
a two-parter. Is
Yeah.
there such a person? And if there was or wasn't, doesn't matter. Is that lake, whatever they call it, was that there or part of their farm?
That's a
Is that
great
their water
question,
source?
and the Darmstadts have to do with that, as it happens. Number one is that Grant Park does have to do with General Ulysses S. Grant. And if you look at some of the streets around, there's like Sheridan and couple of other Civil War generals are named. When the Darmstadts actually, there was another Darmstadt, I'm not sure which one, owned another, maybe it was Emil's brother, also owned a farm? I kind of think so, because there was another Darmstadt farm. And when that land was sold off, he did the development. Before it, 1947, this was another part of the farm in effect. He called it Grant Park and laid out the streets and said that those Civil War names should be there. And so the whole area was called Grant Park. But that name has since shriveled back down to be just that little park that's there now.
And it's the buses use it as a direction. That's the end of the line, Grant Park.
Grant Park,
Bus,
yeah.
lines and whatever.
But the original name had to do with all of the streets that are around there. That whole
What are those?
residential area was called Grant Park. But now it's only the playground park.
That's
Yeah.
my next question. Is that source of water, was that the farm source of water, or is that?
No, you see, back in those times, you only had to dig down 15 feet to find water. The reason is the roads were dirt roads, maybe covered with clamshells. So where did the water go when it rained? Down into the water table. It kept the water table high. Today, it hits that street, it hits your roof, runs to the street, runs to the avenue, into the pipes, out into the bay. So the water table, the upper water table, never has a chance to establish itself. But only 15 feet down, you'd find water.
Okay, so that lake, or whatever you want to call it, that wasn't part of the farm?
That was not part of, it was a part of the original, the other farm. There was another Darmstadt farm, yes.
The other Darmstadt farm used that thing as a.
But they closed,
Like a pond or whatever.
no, that's not true, no. That was a sand pit.
No?
It was called the Big Pit. The Little Pit is where Lynbrook South High School was.
Okay.
But they actually dug so deep that they actually had shovels that would dig down into under the water. They had it suspended out, and they'd move it along, and they dug that stuff up and had a conveyor. And it was used for sand. Like Limbrook's roads came from those pits. The beautiful cement roads that Limbrook has had for so long.
They decided to make a lake out of it?
Decided, though, it filled up with water. I mean, just after they dug out,
Table come in?
it was just a water table. I'm sure it was higher years ago. Now it's lower. So if they don't, Barbara Gribben, yeah.
A question.
Yeah.
My daughter lives on Row Avenue.
Your daughter lives on Row Avenue?
Row, by Lindbrook South Junior High.
Okay.
Part of the property is in Lindbrook and the other part is in East Rockaway. Can you tell me why or how that happened? How was it laid out?
Well, this is a tough question. She wants to know why the property is of her daughter
Yeah.
is half in Limbrook and half in East Rockaway. It was the same kind of question would be for me. Why am I who am in Limbrook? Why am I in the Malvern School District? Or why was Merritt Darmstadt in the Hewlett District? Because these lines were drawn long before there were houses and streets. These lines were
Somebody's farm on either side.
yeah, might have been, but then a residential developer came in. He could care less about some imaginary line that's going across. They just put in the street to make it square.
I think it was built in 38 or 39 somewhere.
Yeah,
I was just wondering how it got into two different.
yeah. They just paid no attention to it. Well, yes, Sandra?
I believe it was great-grandpa Amos Armstead's brother William who had the
That's it. It was his brother, yes, who had the other farm, and developed it as Grant Park, and that's where Grant Park got its name. Okay, thank you very much. It's been fun.